Okay.
Right. Thank you, Maureen. This is Maureen Parry, who's going to show us some photographs from this year, starting with this one, which is a glorious place to be, but I'm sure she'll explain that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Maureen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to share my pictures. So I moved to North Wales in July 2022. So last year, 2023, was my first full year of botanising here. That's me on the Vardre, which is a hill right above the mouth of the Conway Valley. And this year I've met wonderful people, the local Vice County recorders, their groups, North Wales Wildlife Trust people, all sorts of people. And I've been shown amazing habitats and seen many plants for the first time. So I'm going to share some of those with you. Oh, I can't forward my pictures.
Try the up and down one.
It worked earlier, but it's not working now. Hang on, I'm going to. Any idea?
I don't know why that's not.
When we tried earlier, this worked, but it didn't.
Yeah, try pressing that. Now try doing it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So this is a quick detour to Rome, and as you know, if you're a botanist, you look at plants anywhere. And here I'm by the Church of Sant Ivo in Rome, and I'm looking at Urtica membranacea, which it's everywhere in Rome. We've been looking at it in London and noticing it more and more. First recorded in Britain in 2006, and now seeing it regularly in London, and it's spreading. And see, there it is, there's a close-up. And everywhere I go, the famous places in Rome with a strange woman crouching in front of them. Okay. Anyway, but back to Wales. So this was a new plant for me. It's beautiful bitter vetch in the Conway Valley on 2nd of April. Lovely colour combination with the pink flowers and the deep purple calyx. In London, now this is Capsella rubella, pink shepherd's purse. It was by the gateway of the Hackney Tree Nursery, and I was there for the wonderful LNHS dandelion workshop given by Tim Rich. And John Poland, who was attending, spotted this, and we all really enjoyed looking at it. There's the plant. The next day, this is Harefield in the churchyard and in the woods beyond. These are the leaves of coral root, Cardamine bulbosa, not quite in flower. Then the flowers of Goldilocks buttercup, which are generally not fully formed and have petals missing. These were particularly fully formed, but a beautiful show there. Also, we saw wild tulips, Tulipa sylvestris. And in the woods behind that's a wonderful patch of Moscatella, Doxa moscatellina. And there we are, there's a close-up of the flower. Now I'm back in Wales. This is a fantastic site. If you're going along the A55 or travelling by train on the north coast of Wales near Llandudno Junction and look up, there's an obelisk on a hill. And the field in which it sits is a triple SI, and it's a totally fabulous location. This is 22nd of April, and it's covered in cowslips, Primula veris. And then on the south slope, there's a wonderful patch of green-winged orchids, Anacampsis morio, and also squills, Scilla verna. This is the slope a few weeks later, and you can see those are all the green-winged orchids and squills. There it is again. This is further west. This is on the Llŷn Peninsula, Trevor, and here I saw for the first time this most exquisite plant, which is bird's foot, Ornithopsis perpucilis, and there's a close-up, absolutely exquisite little thing. Then on Anglesey, still more squills. This is Wilver Point, where the old nuclear power station is, but it was an absolute carpet of squills, and that was 15th of May. Also on Anglesey, that's me crouched there in the distance. This is the Aberfrau where there is the most amazing dune system. I mean, it's just totally botanist's heaven. And on, this is now 17th of May, I saw common moonwort, Botrychium lunaria. I mean, first of all, you know, I didn't see it. Then I saw one, and when I got my eye in, they were everywhere. It's just quite extraordinary to see it there. And these are the early marsh orchids, Dactylorhiza incarnata, and a few. I mean, there's a beauty. It's amazing color, and that's the creeping willow, and the dewberry, very unusual colored polygala there. And violas. If anyone can pipe up and correct me, because there's lots of experts here. So I'm anyway. I shall continue. Now back to London. So this was on 27th of May in Kensal Green Cemetery with Mario and LNHS friends. It was a treat to see little robin with yellow anthers. There it is. Now that's me on the Great Orme near Llandudno, and there were hundreds of blue butterflies there. I think they were silver spotted. And you can see there's a bit of turf right on the edge of the cliff, and which is fenced off. And when it is fenced off against grazing, you can see all sorts of goodies, including you can see all pyramidal orchids. But most exciting, standing in the middle of the path, was this plant houndstooth, Cynoglossum officinale, with its maroon flowers. And it hadn't been eaten by the famous Kashmiri goats. And in fact, the books say it is unpalatable to grazers, so even goats, which I thought ate anything. And the goats first came to Llandudno when Lord Mostyn acquired a few from Queen Victoria's herd. They bred, and now they're over 100. And you probably know they hit the headlines during the COVID lockdown. They took advantage of the town being largely deserted, came down off the Great Orme, and started eating people's gardens. And there is one in action. Back to London, very much enjoyed John Swindle's walk in Tower Hamlets on 13th of June. There we are with nice Cimbrium, I think, in the foreground. He showed us a very interesting little patch of small toad flax, Caenorhinum minus, growing along. There we are. And here we are again looking at Shadwell Basin. It was a really lovely evening. This plant was new to me this year. This is on the RSPB Reserve on Anglesey, Gair Wen. It's Marsh Cinquefoil, which has a fantastic deep maroon colour. In June, I was with a group looking at sedges. I'm trying to learn sedges a little bit. I'm finding them difficult, but some of them, this is a very particularly striking one. It's Carex magellanica, and the female glooms are narrower than the utricle, so it's very attractive, very beautiful. There's a close-up. And this, of course, is flea sedge, Carex pulicaris, with the deflexed utricles. Back now to Aberfrau, that dune system I mentioned. This is back later in the year. This is 22nd of June. I mean, there are so many orchids. The marsh helleborine, Epipactis palustris, northern marsh orchid. There's a particular kidney vetch, the reddish one, Anthillis vulneraria rubiflora. I think that's an early marsh orchid. And heath spotted. I mean, there are so many. And I was told that this one is narrow-leaved marsh orchid, Dactylorhiza Traunstein nereoides, which anyway, it's an amazing place if you ever get a chance to go there in June. This is extraordinary. A friend took me to see some fabulous plants at an old quarry near Llanrwst. This is the yellow bird's nest, Monotropa hypophytis. It has no chlorophyll, and it links up with a fungus of the Tricoloma group to get nutrients from the surrounding trees. There's a very good little patch of it there. Also, round-leaved wintergreen, Pyrola rotundifolia, with its very distinctive shaped style. Amazing. Both these plants are very rare. The quarry is disused and it's overgrown, so the plants aren't disturbed. But I was really shocked to see the self-seeded conifers there, and nobody seems to be doing anything about controlling that. And It will, of course, radically change this habitat if they're not removed. Back to the sedges. I always like ones you can recognize fairly easily. This is pale sedge, Carex pallescens, and it's nice to recognize because it has a crinkles in its lower bract. This is in the Snowdonia National Park, Erurii, and I went with the County Recorder Wendy McCarthy to reaffirm various records. In the woods above, we saw beech fern. You can see the lowest pinnae are bent back. There it is. And the sorry underneath. Anyway, this is the plant that we wanted to find, very near the water's edge, oblong-leaved sundew, Drosera intermedia. And then in the grass a bit further up, this beautiful little plant is ivy-leaved bellflower, Wallenbergia hederaceae. And further up, as you'd expect, there's the pinguicula, the butterworts. They're back now on the obelisk field, that one I was telling you that is over on the A55. There's these wonderful show of Veronica spicata. They're slightly blurred, these, because it was an incredibly windy day when I took these pictures, but it just was. And this is the field, this is the hill above where we live. It's called the Vardre, and there's a wonderful population of Dianthus deltoides. The slope is grazed and the farmer mows it under a conservation maintenance scheme, so the grass is in good condition. It flowers a good long period. This is 30th of July, and again it's going strong on the 22nd of August. Also in August, I went to Holkin Mountain, which is a limestone mountain above the Dee estuary. It's been mined for lead since Roman times, and it was a major mining area right up into the 20th century. So it's not surprising to find spring sandwort, Sabulina verna, which has the common name of leadwort, because it often occurs on lead spoil. Mm-hmm. You can see the 10 red stamens there. But the main thing we were looking for, these fantastic autumn gentians, Gentianella amarella, with the white hairs in their throats. There we are. And another beautiful flower we saw was the musk thistle, Carduus nutans, with its single nodding flowers. There we are. It was a wonderful year for autumn ladies' tresses, Spiranthus spiralis. These pictures were taken above Llisfine. It's a grassy slope above an old limestone quarry, and it was a truly wonderful sight this year with hundreds of flower spikes. There they are. And here, this is the little rosette, which forms right next to the flower stem for next year's plant. Anyway, finishing off, we're back in London. And this is the New Year flower hunt, December the 1st plant hunt with Nick Bertrand in Deptford. And it's an annual event I really enjoy. I can't remember how many plants we found, I think about 90, but apart from counting, we just really enjoyed looking at plants closely together, looking at the hairy filaries of this fleabane, looking at that little gap on the Diplotaxis. It's great looking at plants really closely together. And it was a new grass for me, rough dog's tail, Cynosaurus echinatus. So that is it from me. Thanks for listening, and happy botanizing, everybody, for 2024.
Thank you, Maureen. That was super. Lovely to see those North Wales plants. I lived there for 3 years, but my mind was in other places, and I hardly saw any of them. Right, you stopped showing. Okay, next on the track is Mark. If you'd like to show your screen, Mark.
Will do. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Brilliant, super. Just checking. My internet connection's not been brilliant today, so I just wanted to quickly start off and actually say hi, Maureen. I'm glad you're enjoying things so much up in North Wales.
Thanks very much.
Your marsh orchids, I suspect two of this, the early marsh, are probably a couple of different subspecies. One's probably subspecies cruenta, and the other one's probably subspecies incarnata, just off the top of my head. And your violet looks like probably subspecies Curtisii if it was down in the sand dunes, which is a really special subspecies of Viola tricolor, if it was in that habitat. So yeah, just to give you those little snippets of info. So, and with that, I will then proceed with my little talk. I can just put my go on slides. There we go. So this is a bit of a random selection put together of images I quite liked, or plants that I'm finding quite interesting or fun at the moment. And this particular one is neither native, as you can see, Apios americana, nor is it a garden escape. This is actually a cultivated thing, but I just really like it. It's a fascinating plant. And it grows as an interesting historic plant in Fulham Palace, which is where I've been working and assisting on and off for about the last 10 years with doing some historic work for Fulham Palace, because it has a very interesting early history in the history of gardening in Britain. Somebody turn their put themselves on mute. I'm getting a lot of background noise.
Yeah, make sure you're muted, please.
Yeah, and if one of the hosts, you can actually go down the participants list and mute people as well if there is.
I just did mute one lady.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was getting a lot of feedback in my headphones as well. So this is a really interesting plant. And Fulham Palace, I recommend anybody who's never been there, go and visit it. It's great. It's a wonderful and fascinating site, part of London's history. I mean, this is a really, really interesting member of the pea family that was actually quite an important food crop for indigenous North American communities, and was introduced into Britain in the late 17th century with the similar sort of purpose in mind of actually introducing it as a crop. But it never took off because it's actually quite slow growing in terms of developing the tubers, but it's a really, really cool plant. Now, some of you who were on social media may well have seen in probably early midsummer a really fantastic shot somebody had taken of this plant, Orobanche hederae, at Camley Street in King's Cross. And unfortunately, I got there a little bit late because the plant was still standing, as you can see from this brown mess, but was no longer the sort of fascinating yellowy purple brown colours of the plant in flesh. But I put it in nevertheless because this is quite an extraordinary showing of this species. It's well worth nipping down to Camley Street next summer and having a look, because I've never seen so much broom rape in any site in London. This patch was exceptionally large, but there were literally thousands of flower spikes there. And also, just to add up, it's a mea culpa is my responsibility, because about 20 odd years ago, I rather naughtily introduced some seeds to the ivy there whilst I was a volunteer at Camley Street. For those of you who are not familiar with this plant, Orobanche hederae is a fascinating parasitic plant. It's a kind of relatively distant relative of things like foxglove and snapdragons, and it sticks specialized roots called horstoria into the stems and roots of its host plant, which in this case is ivy. And as a consequence, it's given up on photosynthesis. So even at its best whilst flowering, it is a leafless, browny, purple, orange looking thing. But an amazing and fascinating plant and an extraordinary showing. Just for some of you who are probably not maybe familiar with who I am or my role in the LNHS, I'm the vascular plant recorder. I coordinate a range of activities to do with recording London's plant life. Ultimately, I'm responsible when everything's finished for writing a new plant account, what we call a flora for the Greater London area. And over the last couple of years, I've actually been working on a red plant list, which is a list of looking at risks of extinction of species of plants in the London area. The work I've done has been interesting, but it's also been really, really quite shocking. It's fair to say that London has probably got one of the worst or evolving and developing extinction rates of any place in Britain and Northwest Europe in terms of its loss of plants. We've lost about 170 plant species so far over the last 300 years. Here are two that I was actually and continue to be quite concerned about. On the left is this Scylla. This is a squill, which is a relative of Maureen's squill from North Wales. Both species are actually, we have two native squills, autumnalis and Verna, the one Maureen showed. They're both largely plants of Western Britain and Ireland. And Verna doesn't occur in southeast England, but this species does, and actually is genetically distinct as well. Southeast English populations are in severe trouble. They're very, very fragmented. Most of them, frankly, are extinct. And those that remain are very, very small, although thankfully, very recently, a quite large and thriving population was found in Surrey near the River Thames. This particular not brilliant shot was taken in Hampton Court, where there's a known population that has been known for hundreds of years, and is an important population, but I'd never actually been able to get down there. So earlier this year, I took the opportunity to go and do a quick survey because I was concerned, because my records from data that people had contributed indicated that the numbers were quite low. I was very, very pleasantly relieved to find the habitat it was in appeared to be in overall very good condition, and there were many hundreds, if not thousands, of plants on the site. So that particular site is secure and looking very well. What was particularly pleasing was the site had some very interesting other plants in there, including harebell, Campanula rotundifolia. This is another species which is going through quite major declines in southeast England. And in the London area is frankly, if we don't get ourselves sorted out, is heading towards extinction. North of the River Thames, this plant, it has only probably 2 or 3 sites where its future seems at all viable the way things are going at the moment. But wonderful, fascinating plants of nutrient poor grasslands in southeast England. I've also been doing bits of survey work on and off as part of my life to earn money. And I put this in because I like yellow loosestrife. It's a very nice plant. But I had never taken notice or paid attention and heed to its extraordinary stolons. These are the stolons on the right-hand side. These are running things. Think of it like strawberry plants that run across the surface of the soil, root and regroot and produce new plants. Absolutely extraordinary structures. The area where I saw this was actually in Greenwich Peninsula Ecology Park, which is well worth a visit. And there was quite an extensive mat of these growing over the exposed mud. And it's fair to say urban botanizing, you end up with all sorts of oddities and peculiarities. And this was one that caught my eye. This is, a very ordinary plant for many of us who botanize in London and southern Britain. Veronica persica, the common field speedwell, a well-established non-native species, been around for a very long time, and a very common plant that we see in many, many habitats. This particular plant was really rather odd, though. The flowers were a bit larger than normal, and they had this peculiar sort of pinky purpley violet color, quite different to the normal colour form. It's fair to say I've looked at it and I've tried to think of conceiving it being another species or whatever, but I can't. It just seems to be a really rather odd colour variation for this species. Now, earlier this spring, I managed to get away and have a nice holiday with my partner, and we ended up in Switzerland and to see relatives. And it was particularly nice one day going out to see, very early spring in Switzerland, to see this fantastic plant, Hepatica triloba. Obvious was its name, 3-lobed Hepatica, and it refers, and triloba rather, referring to the 3 lobes, and Hepatica referring to the fact that it's said to look like the liver, the human liver. This member of the buttercup family, related to anemones. Some taxonomists put it in the genus anemone. Not only is it a gorgeous plant, but I just put it in really because actually this was really very satisfying for me to see, because this would probably, last time I saw this growing in the wild and flowering was over 40 years ago when I was a schoolboy on a school trip to Austria. So I was really, really pleased to see this again and get a reasonable photograph of a really rather lovely continental European woodland plant, which is sadly, because of the last ice age, not native to Britain and Ireland. Another plant as part of my youthful botanizing experience, which I was very lucky to re-see, was this thing. This is Medicago marina. It's not a British plant. It's not far away though. It grows as a wild plant here on the south coast of Brittany. and is possibly spreading further north. I wouldn't be at all surprised if maybe it doesn't colonise southwest England at some point over the coming decades because of climate change. And this is a specialist plant of sand dune habitats around the western sort of seaboard of Europe and into the Mediterranean basin, where it's quite widespread. And again, I haven't seen this for many, many years, since I was in my late teens whilst misbehaving in Brittany with my friend as a 19-year-old. So this was a really nice and fun plant to see again, this time on the south coast of France. Coming back to Britain, and these were two fantastic things to be seeing as part of my survey work. I've been involved for the last few years in a really, really interesting project with a French vineyard or French vineyard company who are buying quite large tracts of southern Britain, up in this particular case in Kent. And they're buying up these tracts of land because they can see the writing on the wall for them of champagne production and other forms of wine production in France because of climate change. So they're increasingly moving their operation into southern Britain. This one is particularly interesting as an organisation in terms of how they manage their land, because they're organic and they are setting aside quite significant areas of their estate for wildlife and biodiversity and doing their best to manage their landscape in a sustainable way. So they've had me along on and off for the last few years doing survey work, and we've been finding some really fantastic records, including this wonderful basil thyme, which is at risk of extinction in southeast England, and less endangered, but nevertheless extremely uncommon plants such as wild licorice, both of which are characteristic of sort of chalk grassland and scrubby chalk habitats. Another rarity, which I was finally able to see for the very first time actually in my life, is this thing, Melon pyromarvensi. This is another parasitic plant, for those of you who are not familiar with it. This one does actually retain some green foliage and photosynthetic capacity, and so it is a hemi or semi-parasite. And this plant is actually part of a quite thriving colony, which is under very careful management of the Wildlife Trust on the Isle of Wight, which I believe is the sole surviving truly native population in Britain. All the other surviving populations are reintroductions, a really, really quite seriously threatened plant in Western Europe. And to the right is this rather wonderful Aristolochia clematitis, the birthwort, so named because it was used for inducing birth in traditional medicine throughout Europe and in other cultures over the last few millennia. Very, very interesting, fascinating plant with these extraordinary greeny yellow tubular flowers. Now, another plant I've not wanted to see for many, many years, but has never got around to until being able to see it until earlier this year, is this fantastic thing. This is Platycapnos spicata, and Platycapnos are really wonderful, jazzy-looking plants, and these are relatives of Fumarias. These are relatives of Fumaria and Yellow corridalis, the plant we see very familiar on walls in the London area. But this behaves like quite a few of the arable Fumaria species that we're familiar with in southeast England, in that it's an annual plant primarily of cultivated and open habitats. And it really is quite an extraordinary plant, and is almost entirely restricted as a group of plants to Spain, parts of southern France, I believe a little bit of Italy, and a few areas of northern Africa. Really, really interesting group of plants. So I spent quite a bit of time on my travels earlier in the year, and I just put this in because it just reminds us of sunny times. A nice picture of two widespread plants of the Mediterranean basin and increasingly in southern Britain. But this image just shows you very nicely and clearly the very significant differences between the two date palms that we do sometimes come across in gardens or plantings in southern Britain in the warmer parts of the country. And these are date palm on the left and the Canary Island date palm. And you can see the Canary Island is a much stouter and more robust beast. Now, once a year, I go down to the south of Spain, where I actually teach a botany class up in the Alpujarras Mountains, and I've become very, very fond of the Alpujarras. It's an absolutely extraordinary part of Europe with amazing biodiversity. And this particular plant is one of the star attractions of southeast Spain. This is a relative of our sea lavenders, but this is a plant that doesn't grow coastal areas. It grows in dry, semi-arid, almost desert type environments. This is Limonium spectabile, which is really, truly one of our most wonderful plants of Europe, and a glorious thing to see in these otherwise apparently from a distance quite barren environments. And another plant of southern Spain I wanted to see for years and kept missing for various reasons was this absolutely extraordinary and somewhat bonkers looking thyme. This is a member of the genus Thymus, so this is a relative of what we put in our pizzas, but looks very unlike virtually any thyme that most of us prefer. This is the wonderful Thymus longiflorus, which is an endemic species to southeast Spain. And that is the end. I just thought I'd put some nice jolly berries from my loganberry bush in my allotment to remind us that spring is around the corner and soon we'll be enjoying the bounties of summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Very nice. I think I'll go to the fridge and get some raspberries now. Okay. John, you're on next.
George, can I just ask, are we going to do all the questions at the end? Because there's a couple of that have been popped in from Mark, or do we want to take them?
Let's do them at the end.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that all right? Okay, John, if you want to share your screen.
Can we all see that picture now? A few botanical photos?
Yep.
Okay, this is a very personal run through of various plants. Unlike our two previous speakers, I'm going to start off with cultivated plants because I want to show you a little bit of what I can see from right close to my house. Then I shall move a bit further out into the rest of London, and I shall finally finish even further away from London in Scotland. So let's see what we have. I'm fortunate to live in a London square which has a communal garden, and we, the residents, take great pride in looking after it. One of the residents who died sadly, about 20 years ago, was a New Zealander, and we were very pleased to be able to donate a large section of the garden to his New Zealand plants. So what I thought I would do is run through some of these New Zealand plants, many of which will, well, some of which will be familiar to gardeners amongst you, but many of which will not, I think. I've tried since the death of poor Derek Patterson, who was the New Zealander, I've tried to look after these plants and keep them going. And in fact, they've done surprisingly well in central London. So let's just run through some of these plants. Starting with, which many of you will be familiar with, Sophora. It's a genus of plants which is pretty well endemic to New Zealand and Australia. And it produces these wonderful tall trees with, as you see on the left-hand side, the pea-like fruits. It's a member of the Fabaceae. And we have several species of this Sophora in the garden. Here, for example, is one of the hybrids of the Sophora microphylla, the one I just showed you, with a very much smaller plant, Sophora prostrata, which is actually a ground-hugging plant. And the interesting feature about these plants, all the Sophora, is that they're very early flowering. In fact, the photograph on the right here, I took earlier this week. So they're already getting into full stride of flowering. Pseudopanax is another genus of plants which is common in New Zealand, lancewood. Here is one of the species, Pseudopanax ferox, fierce Pseudopanax. As you can see from the picture on the left, particularly, these leaves are really rather vicious, and I haven't got a very good photograph of them to show just how spiky they are, clearly evolved as a protection against herbivory. This particular species of Pseudopanax is one of several species which exhibit peculiar behavior in that the juvenile leaves, which you see here, are very different from the leaves of mature plants, which are not at all toothed, not at all long linear, indeed look quite different, look as if they're from a different plant. And indeed, when Hooker in the 19th century wrote his Flora of New Zealand, he actually assumed that they were different plants, that the young plants were different species from the mature ones. And this is a habit which several pseudopanic species have. There are several in this garden. Here's another one, Pseudopanax discolor. This is not one of those pseudopanax which looks very different in mature and juvenile forms, but it's, as you see, quite an attractive bushy plant. Pittosporum are plants which many gardeners know about, and most British gardens have some Pittosporum plants in. We have about 6 or 7 different species of Pittosporum in the New Zealand garden. On the top left is Crassifolium, and on the right is Fairchildii, which comes from the Three Kings Islands off New Zealand. They look rather similar, but the leaves have different sort of indumentum. One of them, the Crassifolium, it's essentially glabrous on the underside. With Fairchildii, it's very lanose and very woolly on the underside. Another Pittosporum, which has the delightful name of anomalum, because it's anomalous, is this plant. It's not obvious because I haven't put a ruler against it, but the plant on the left is about as high as my knee. In other words, it's just 1.5 foot high, or 1 foot and a bit high. And on the right, you can see that it has these tiny and very attractive Pittosporum-like flowers. And on the right, you can see one of those leaves of this Pittosporum. That leaf is about 5 millimeters long. So it's a really tiny, attractive little plant. And there are a few similar Pittosporums in the garden, which are rather different from the normal horticultural variety. We have a Clyanthus, Cacabeak, as it's called. Very, very attractive flowers. And I think quite a lot of gardens in Britain do try to grow these. It's not terribly hardy, a little bit tender, and we have lost the plants in the garden before. But being in central London, it does have a much better climate for these tender plants than if it were outside. And here are 3 more examples of New Zealand species. On the left, the lacebark, a tall, elegant tree. If you want to grow these plants, like Hoheria, for example, be aware that they spread easily. They're extremely fertile and they will self-seed all over the place. We have a great deal of trouble keeping them down. On the left is a Brachyglottis rangiora, and on the right, an Olearia. These are both members of the family Asteraceae. They're both daisy-like plants. And one thing I should say about these New Zealand plants, unlike most European plants, most of New Zealand plants, as I'm showing here, are evergreen. And that means that they can suffer quite a lot if the winter is really hard. They don't lose their leaves. I'm not quite sure why it is. Maybe Mark's expertise can tell me why it should be that plants in New Zealand anyway have evolved that the majority of them, of the trees, are evergreen rather than deciduous. Just 2 more plants from New Zealand. We can go, whoops, sorry, let me get back. On the left is a plant, Carmichaelia muritae, or cord broom, which looks a little bit like our normal broom plants from Europe. Again, it's a member of the pea family. this particular plant you will not see in another English garden. In fact, you won't see it in many New Zealand gardens because as a native plant in New Zealand, it's threatened with extinction. At the last count that I'd heard about, there were 12 plants of this left in the wild in New Zealand. So we treasure it and hope that it keeps going well in the garden. And the final New Zealand plant I just wanted to mention on the bottom right, the Fuchsia procumbens. This is a tiny little fuchsia which hugs the ground, and it's got a unique character, as you can see in the picture, that the flower, fuchsia flower, points upwards. Almost all fuchsias, other than this, flowers, of course, as you know, hang down. But this, once again, it is a small flower. The total length of that flower in that picture is about 9 to 10 millimeters, but extremely attractive plant. So that was a run through of plants from outside my front door, if you like. Let me now move on to wild plants in the rest of London. Now, first plant I want to mention is not one that I found. It was found by Roy Vickery, whom you may know from the Natural History Museum or the South London Botanical Institute. Roy was walking around London in Westminster. We're standing just across from Westminster Abbey at the moment. The Queen Elizabeth Conference Centre is on your right. And Roy noticed an interesting plant growing on this great wall. And it was growing where the arrow points. And as you can see from the picture, there are several ferns here. On the left is wallrue, Asplenium rutimeraria. But what is this plant in the middle? Well, Roy showed it to me, and I went to have a look at it. And it turns out to be Asplenium obovatum, which is lanceolate spleenwort. You can see from the frond in the right-hand side of the picture that it is looking a little bit like Asplenium adiantum nigrum, black spleenwort, but it is not triangular. It is indeed more lance-shaped, as its name implies, lanceolate spleenwort. Well, it's interesting to find it here because it shouldn't grow in London. This, if you can see it, is the distribution of this plant in Britain. It's extremely restricted to the southwest and the Scilly Isles, with odd outliers in Wales. But interestingly, this is the second time that this plant has been found to grow in London. The other site, which was found a few years ago, I'm afraid, is near King's Cross and has been lost in the big King's Cross development. So that's a plant which one would not expect to find in London. Here's a plant which occasionally one does find, stinking hellebore, again growing near King's Cross. I saw this a couple of years ago, and it's recurred since. It has probably, I don't think it's been planted, but it's escaped from someone's garden somehow. It's actually doing quite well in this particular site, which is fairly well protected. It's by some steps which lead down to the Regent's Canal at King's Cross, and it's protected from people treading on it, not from people picking it, I suspect. I now want to move over to someone a bit closer to where Mark lives, actually, Claremont Square in Islington. It's a square which surrounds a reservoir. This is an underground reservoir for Thames water, which is originally a reservoir built for the New River, when that supplied water to London. And the reservoir, as you see, is covered. It's covered with grass and shrubs. No planting, so far as I know, has been done there. So the plants have arrived by themselves and without the aid of man. And one plant which I noticed, which was quite interesting to me anyway, is alder buckthorn. There are several. In fact, I would go as far as to say there are about a dozen separate bushes of alder buckthorn growing on this grassy cover to the reservoir in Claremont Square. And you can see from the picture on the left why it's sometimes called black-berried alder, rather attractive berries. I didn't realize that it would be so easy to find in the centre of London. And just a little further away from that Claremont Square site, the other side of the Pentonville Road is Grimaldi Park. I was visiting this park last year, and I came across, in the rather scrubby area which had not been tended, I came across this, and I puzzled over it. I came to the conclusion that it's an ornithogallum, and there are several such plants here. And after coming back and taking more pictures, I saw it on one day, thought that that's interesting, went home. The next day I came back with my camera to take some pictures, and I found that a lot of people must have been there before me, because the ground had been trampled as though others had also been looking at this. And my conclusion was that it's Ornithogallum narbonense, except that the books for narbonense say that the anthers are yellow. Well, the anthers of this plant are certainly not yellow. So I stand to be corrected. I don't know how it got there. Perhaps it was just a throw-out, or perhaps someone attempted to grow it there. But it's certainly a very striking plant, and I'll be interested to see if it occurs again this year. Regent's Park. Regent's Park has been known to have the occasional orchids appearing, and indeed it did so last year. There is a stretch of the water of the grassland besides the lake in Regent's Park, which last summer was fenced off by presumably the Royal Parks authorities, for the obvious reason that there were some orchids growing there. I couldn't get too close to take a picture of it, but the one on the right is the closest I could get to. I believe it's Dactylorhiza praetomissa, and it appeared that other people had been there before me, because some of the flowers had been picked from the inflorescence, as though people had taken them away to check. Interestingly, if it is praetomissa, I suddenly thought, what on earth does praetomissa mean? And so I decided to find out. It turns out that it was Druce who, amongst other things, first separated out some of the Dactylorhiza, and he indeed separated this from Dactylorhiza majalis. And praetomissa means overlooked or forgotten about, and presumably it was so named because it is now believed to be a true species which was separated from other species not much more than a century ago. We saw a picture earlier of John Swindle's at Shadwell Basin. I went to Shadwell Basin too in 2019 and saw this plant, Crassula mossy stonecrop, to my great surprise, because I certainly not expected to see it in London. I believe actually John Swindell saw it at the same site a week or two before I saw it in 2019. But it's still there. May 2020, I took a picture, and again in April 2022, and I hope it's there still. It too is a plant which is rather surprising to find in London. In fact, it's got a rather peculiar distribution over Britain. This map shows, I hope you can see it, that it is a very disjunct distribution on heathland, essentially, gravelly heathland, both in the south of England, or the east, and in northern Scotland, but not in between. I don't really, I can't imagine that the habitat just doesn't exist somewhere in between these hotspots, but it's a rather strange sort of distribution. So that was my little tour around London, and I'll finally move on to my farthest trip to Scotland. I take a lot of photographs in Scotland because until recently, we had a house in Scotland, which we have recently sold. So I won't have the pleasure of being able to walk out of the front door and see some of the wonderful plants, which I'll just show you in a moment. The other good reason for showing you some plants from Scotland is, of course, that today is Burns night. So everything Scottish is on the table tonight. This is not from Scotland. This is from London. This is New Zealand bittercress, Cardamine corymbosa. Sorry about the spelling there, corymbosa. I took a photograph of this in London in 2019, I suppose, a little earlier than that. And to my surprise, at my house in Scotland, outside the back door on a gravelly area, I saw the same plant growing. I can't imagine that it just happened to grow outside my front door than anywhere else. I imagine that somehow or other, I must have brought some seeds up with me from London to Scotland. Otherwise, how did it get there? I do not know, and I don't suppose I ever will know, but it's nice to know that this plant, well, maybe it isn't nice to know, it's one of these New Zealand plants which, once introduced, spreads very easily. And it's certainly spreading in Scotland. Now, most of the other plants I'm going to show you, I was able to walk to from my front door of the house that we had in Scotland. It was in a pretty remote area of the Angus Glens. And so being able, just as you heard earlier, Maureen Parry, to walk out of your front door and see wonderful plants is a great privilege. I don't know if anyone would have any idea of what this drift of bluish plants on this rough pasture is. If you can't guess, let me show you. It's field gentian. I have never ever seen such a sweeping of thousands and thousands of plants of gentianella as I did that year. This was a few years ago. The gentians are still there, but never have I seen them in such quantity as it was about 10 years ago that photograph was taken. Another plant that I can walk to with a bit of effort because I have to climb a hill is this, which is Melica nutans, a lovely grass, mountain melic. It so much lives up to its name of nodding melic or mountain melic that it's almost unbelievable. We also saw wintergreens earlier. This is intermediate wintergreen, corolla media, which grows in the moorland amongst the heather. In fact, in a very, very specific habitat. It's a habitat in which heather, Colonna, is growing together with bearberry, Arctostaphylos ursi. And where heather and bearberry grow together, you will very likely find intermediate wintergreen growing. And it's a delightful plant with the bell-shaped inflorescence and the protruding style. And on the right, another plant. I have to go a bit farther from my front door to get to that because it's growing in a pine plantation near a local village. Creeping ladies tresses, Goodyear repens, and they're doing very well. And another plant which, again, you're not likely to find in the south of England, Heath pearlwort, a lovely little plant. It's so nice to see pearlworts which actually have petals on, rather than the rather boring procumbens and similar ones that we see here. Well, we do see sea pearlwort, of course, but Sagina subulata is very, very attractive little plant. There it is. Again. And I'm afraid that's me. And what am I doing? Well, I'm with my colleague Theo Lurzu on the right, trying to check out how many plants of bog orchid we can find, Amabaya paludosa. Again, this is within relatively easy walking distance of my front door. Bog orchid is lovely when you find them. You'll not usually find them by looking for them because they're very, very difficult to see. And in the case of, in my case, I've found them fairly often, but always when I was not looking for them. You just stumble across them. They're tiny plants, a few centimeters high, and they blend into the background very easily. But it will be a shame to say goodbye to them now that we no longer have the house where I found them. Finally, the plant that I've spent most time on in the years that I've been in Scotland is a plant which is very rare in Scotland, and it's very rare in Britain. And I spent some time actually as monitoring this plant for the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. And it is Woodsia ilvensis, oblong Woodsia, a fern which is just hanging on in Britain. There are, I think, 4 sites in Britain, 2 in Scotland, 1 in Wales, 1 in the Lake District. This one in Scotland it's doing quite well, but it's not reproducing. It seems to be genetically poor. It doesn't have much of a gene stock. But monitoring it has been an exhilarating and exciting experience because it sometimes grows in places that are very difficult to get to. We'll finish with Scotland, just go straight to finish off back home to London. A couple more plants which grow in the garden, the communal garden outside my house, which shouldn't grow there. We didn't plant them. Allium subhirsutum is growing there. Hairy garlic, certainly not planted. It does crop up occasionally in various places. I always wonder why plants have the name that they do have. It's called subhirsutum. It means almost hairy. And you can probably see from this photograph of a leaf that its hairs are there, but there's not much of them. So it certainly deserves the name subhirsutum. One more plant which appeared, again, to my knowledge, it says not planted in our garden, is Lathyrus vernus, spring pea. Here it is. There's just one plant. It appeared at the edge of a border. Maybe it got brought in with some other planting. Who knows? But again, it's a very, very attractive plant. My last plant, it's going to be another fern. It is one that I did plant, and again, it's growing very well. Woodwardia radicans, a European chainfern. It's not a British plant. It is hard to know whether it will survive. It's survived many winters so far in my garden, and let's hope it keeps going. It seems to be reproducing because you can see in the middle tiny little sporelings, which I hope will eventually grow into big plants, and then I'll be able to show you photographs of them. So I'll finish at that point. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you, John. Nice to visit Scotland, even if only photographically. Right, this is common plant, red dead nettle. This was last April, and there was tons of it. And it was the beginning of spring, and I just liked the look of it. It brightened up my walk down to the supermarket. And oh, sorry. And there it is, close up. Closely related to Lamium plexicaule. I can't remember the English name. This you get, it's fairly frequent, but usually in very small numbers. It has a much longer corolla tube and rather more contrasty a lower lip. It was in the cemetery, West Horsley Cemetery. I could see that from sort of 50 yards away. Aranthus hyemalis, the winter aconite, seems to be doing very, very well there. I tried to get it going in my garden, and I think I planted about 20. Last year, one came up. This year, there's nothing. So something's eating it. But it's mixed with Crocus thomasinianus, the early crocus, and about 1 billion snowdrops. And there's the aconite close up. It's in the buttercup family, and you can see the obvious similarity to the floral structure of a buttercup. Celandines. I've never seen ones quite as pale as this before. This was on a roadside verge near Wisley. Anything near Wisley I regard with a degree of suspicion, but there was a lot of it, obviously quite happily looking after itself, mixed with one of the normal coloured ones. And that's a pale one close up. And this is a double Ficaria verna. It's in the front garden. I can't remember how I got it or where it came from, but it comes up every year and it's gradually getting bigger. The also ordinary Ficaria verna in the back garden, Vara bulbifera, is getting extremely common. It's all over the place and it's reproducing itself quite readily. Last year was a good year for common stalkspill, Erodium cichitarium. There are a couple of fields like this, just a sheet of purple. If you look closely, look at an individual flower, they've got beautiful, they're not quite symmetrical, they're slightly zygomorphic. The two smaller lower petals have got black speckles at the base. You have to look closely to see it. Most people, most of the time, we just look down and see, we know what it is, you recognize the leaves, you recognize the flowers, but don't look at the detail. This is Epsom and Ewell Cemetery. Last May, I went there to look for a sedum, actually, which we found the previous autumn. I think it's Sedum hybridum. I'd never seen it before. I went back, I looked all over for it. I couldn't find it anywhere, but I did find man orchids. And there are the men. And there was some white helleborine as well, Cephalanthera damasonium. Right, last autumn, out with a friend on rough ground near in Guildford, we came across this, and I looked at it, and it vaguely rang a bell. It's obviously a mallow, and there it is. And the epicalyx, the sort of the next whorl underneath the calyx, suggests that it came from, it used to be called Lavatera, which was the case, and it's Lavatera trimestris, royal mallow, and it's strange in that if you try to look at normally you can see the fruits there, a ring of them, but you can't on this one, and there's an umbrella-like cover over it. But if you peel the sepals away, you can see the seeds underneath. So it's extremely distinctive, quite an attractive plant, and it's a garden escape. And I've seen it once before in a nursery in North London about 25 years ago. Another garden escape, Himalayan knotweed, Persicaria affinis. Sprawls. This is the garden's. This is the edge of the garden fence. It sort of is untended, but it's looking after itself, spreading out across the footpath nearby, and that's the inflorescence. Last autumn, I was out with a friend, and the same friend as one I was with when we found the Malva trimestris, and we found a bush covered with black fruits, which we confidently named as Prunus cross-fruticans, a hybrid between sloes and Prunus domestica. And it got me thinking, how do we know it's that? Well, it's not so easy. Those are, I believe those are sloes, but I haven't actually proved it because that photograph was taken some time ago. But this is a photograph of the hybrid that we found. You can't really tell from this, but they were larger and they were edible. They weren't unpleasant at all. And again, I thought, how do we know it's that? Why isn't it Prunus domestica? So a work in progress is to look at different plums and look at the seeds inside the pyrene. This is another one, a white bullous, again, part of the sort of aggregate, the Prunus domestica aggregate, very distinctive and quite edible. There they are close up. This was quite a struggle to get to, but there are because it was in the middle of a load of brambles and nettles and on a slope, and I thought, the pain was worth it. So I thought, can you tell them apart by the length of the pyrene, the seed inside them? A pyrene is a seed enclosed in a tight endocarp. So the bit you see is the actual outside of the inner layer of the ovary, which is hard and encases it tightly. And that's a proper sloe, less than 10 millimeters, but almost circular. This is a damson. It was about November when I thought, I wish I had damson seeds. Where can I get damsons from? But if you write to British Frozen Fruits in Herefordshire, they'll send you some. So I got a couple of kilograms of frozen damsons just for the seeds. And the ones I didn't eat, which is most of them, I gave to a friend and she turned them into damson jelly. But this is a work in progress. I've got to see the plants actually flowering. Right, to get away from plants, inspired by Paul Richards' talk, I Am Not a Spider, which is on the LNHS website, I started looking around for harvestmen. And this one was in the garden. He says, I'm afraid it's in a pot on my desk. He said they're easy to photograph, they don't run around. Well, he hasn't met this one. So I put it in a pot and photographed it. It's a male, the Odiella spinosa. It's quite a common one. I did find a female earlier in the year, but I didn't take a pic. And this is another one. This is an alien harvestman, a native, I think, of Italy, but gradually spreading north through Europe. This was on a wall. It's in November, actually, on a wall in Guildford, or a fence in Guildford. And if you want to look close up, there it is. And one thing that separates harvestmen, apart from spiders is the eyes only has 2 eyes, and there they are, instead of 8, on a little mound, a little turret on the top of its head called the ocularium. They also have a body with no 2 divisions. Spiders have 2 divisions, the cephalothorax and the abdomen, but this just has one segmented blob. Right, a musk beetle. I was walking around some new ponds on Hawthorne Common, not far from here. I found this scratchy thing on my arm. I looked down, it was this, and it's about 1 inch long. It was magnificent. It's not uncommon, but it's an inhabitant of damp places. Does anyone know what that is? It's, as it says, it's a little spiky thing scuttling around the room of a plant pot. There are quite a few of them, and I have no idea. I can't even put it in an order. Just walking home one day, there's a female orange tip on the host plant, Jack by the Hedge, Alliaria petiolata. Don't tend not to see many females, and when you do, you might not notice them unless they settle, because they look just like whites. They have a slightly different way of flying, but this one was very cooperative, and I love the pattern on the underside of the back wings. Right, Staines bus station in January. Can you see any fungi? Well, there's one there. What the substrate is, I can't imagine, but that's it close up. And I believe it's Serpula lacrymans, dry rot, which does get all over the place. I sent a photograph to Mark Spencer to name for me because I hadn't a clue. And that's what he suggested. I haven't been back this year to see if it's still there or got any bigger, or if that little turret has fallen apart because of the decay. No Mo May. These are the Mo. This is again on the way to the local supermarket. Driving past, I saw it. It stood out like a sore thumb. Blue Iringo. It does occur occasionally as a garden escape. There it is close up. I took a little bit home for the pot, and I thought I'd go back and take some more photographs, and it had gone. I think someone thought it was attractive enough to dig up and take home. Or maybe they just cut it off at ground level. So I'll have to see if it comes up again this year, because it is a perennial. This is a cultivated plant, but I'd never seen anything like it. I hadn't a clue. So I sent a bit to Eric Clement. He named it for me as Burkea purpurea, which is a South African plant. And the flowers look like that. That's a British bee. I'm not sure which one. Buff-tailed bumblebee, I expect. Oh, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. Right, No Mo May, again, the end of my road. A nice display of peachleaf bellflower. I've seen it before, but I've seen that. I recognise the leaves before. There's usually just rosettes, but because of No Mo May, it was able to flower properly. And there it is close up. Right, last slide. Mick Massey sent me this. He took the photograph. It's a rat's tail plantain. I think it's called greater plantain now, but I think rat's tail is much more evocative, showing phyllidy, which is an abnormal growth, and each flower has actually is grown into a branch and produced lots more. I don't know where he took it. He sent me that today. I think that's the last one. Yes. Thank you, everybody. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Hi there, all. It's been like over 2 years since I became a member of the London Natural History Society. So I'm just going to go over the many plants have grown over the years in Gibraltar and how they're doing this final year of my living here. This final day, actually, because I'm catching a flight over to England tomorrow. Yay! Right. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to go back one. Oh, this is the start. So this is a Yucca gigantea, otherwise known as Yucca elephantipes, because its base resembles an elephant's foot. This is one of the first plants I planted when I worked at the Gibraltar Botanic Gardens over some 30 years ago. It was only about 1 meter high then. It's in flower. Well, it was in flower about a month ago. This is variegated Philostachys bambisoides, Japanese timber bamboo. I bought and planted after leaving the Botanic Gardens about a decade later after leaving and spending a year at Chichester College. I came back and I donated this. It was only about 1 meter high at the time. I planted it myself. And it cost me something like 200 to 300 quid at the time. Well, very expensive to buy, but it was worth it. It's grown large. I've made several cuttings from this one and sold them. So gave back money. This is me during and working in the Botanic Gardens. I had a garden employed part-time in the Gibraltar Hindu Temple, which I also used as a nursery for growing plants. It was rather wild. They've done a better job since I've left. This is a favorite plant I had there, which is fishbone cacti. Cactus anguiliga. I don't know where I pronounced that right. Which I grew from a small cutting I found in an abandoned garden and then forgot in a friend's car for a few days, but it survived. And I've also made several plants from that one. This was just taken yesterday. Euphorbia candelabrum, if I remember correctly, native to Madagascar. This was a unrooted cutting, which I planted straight into the soil, and it was rotten at one end. Brian Lamb, the curator at the Botanic Gardens at the time, had a succulent and a succulent expert that told me about cauterizing it with sulfur, which I did. And then after that, I just placed, because it was a cavity, I placed a plastic bucket on for many years, and it was only 1 meter then. That's about 7 to 8 meters. Below it is a native succulent to the Canary Islands called Kleinia nerifolia, I think, which was only about 1 foot high, but pot-bound when I planted it beside the Euphorbia candelabrum. It is now a few meters high itself. This is a tree I grew at the Hindu Temple nursery. I was working at Morrison's supermarket then at the time. I bought it as a very small sapling at Morrison's, and I grew it to something far larger, which I then had planted at just in front of the hospital at the Morrison's car park. And that's what it is now. It's grown much larger. So I'm rushing through this. Whilst working at the Hindu Temple, I also donated a large amount of spare plants to the Gibraltar Heritage Trust. We had two empty patios to fill in. I also maintained this garden until last year when I handed it over to someone else. I made the garden pay for itself. I paid for all the plants, the compost, the pots, and everything. My favorite plant at the Heritage Trust is this now almost 2 stories high Epithelium oxapetalum, which I grew from a small cutting given to me. It has large hand-sized flowers, which open at night and are moth and bat pollinated. This is from Wikipedia, just to show you what it's like when it's closed. About as large, when the flowers open, about as large as a hand. This is a philodendron, a recent photograph of a philodendron I grew in the patio beside another patio there at the Heritage Trust. I left the garden in the temple once I started working at an art gallery located at Gibraltar's largest public square. And that's shots of it through the ages. Now this plant, I call my St. George's because it's sort of like a red against a white background, and it flowers non-stop all year. It's one of those plants that in this climate flowers non-stop. It's a gorgeous. My St. George's is a gorgeous. And I also used to celebrate St. George's Day at this very plaza because I loved England. I've always loved England for quite a long while. They've been very good to me since decades back, and I like to celebrate it. working at that art gallery, I then I was asked when I could open do a garden. This was empty when I got it. At another art gallery. Sorry, a neighbor's making noises at me. It's distracting me. And I said yes. This was about 100 meters from the plaza at Casemates. I started filling in with plants. I used to bring compost bags on my motorbike and the pots and everything. I paid for everything. I made it pay for himself. This is at minimum wage, 5 hours a day, part-time, but I made it pay for himself. It didn't really cost me anything, just the physical effort in doing it. These are sacrificial nasturtiums. We grow these. I grew them there specifically to feed the caterpillars. We sort of agreed that it was going to be sort of like an eco garden. This is an old photograph. Nowadays, and this is, sorry, I'll go back. I think I've missed a slide there. I've missed the script I was reading, so I'll just improvise. So because it's an eco garden, I focused on having sacrificial plants. I love the fact that we can feed the caterpillars and they'll feed some of the birds around. These are Lobularia maritima, native sweet alyssum, and they self-seeded. They eke out a living in an inch of soil at the base of that wall. And they self-seed. I planted some. I did plant some, but they also self-seeded and encouraged it. So I'm just going to try and catch up on my scripts. Okay. Right. This is a self-seeded mirabilis. They form enormous tubers. This is still at the second art gallery I've worked in. They form enormous tubers, lovely plants. Quite showy, a bit messy, but very showy. And this is a self-seeded oleander, Nerium oleander. It pays to know your weeds, because if you spot this when it's just an inch high, you say, oh my God, it's growing there in wasteland. And that's just rubble left over from construction. And I planted some aloes in, but look, it grew into something quite substantial. I will come back to my St. George's, Euphorbia milli. I forgot to call its name. It's a red flowered cultivar, Euphorbia milli. To get this to branch, you can see it's a branch plant. To get it to branch, if you take a cutting and you plant it, it grows vertically without branching. It won't progress. So what you do is you cut the top off. You can replant that and let the stalk there, you let it grow there for a couple of years without any leaves. It won't even shed any leaves because the stalk's slightly photosynthetic, which is not visibly apparent. If you dig in with a nail, you can see there's a chlorophyll there. But after 4 to 5 years, it starts branching. It takes a long while. I discovered this by chance over the years. I call it like my dragon's plant, my St. George's dragon's egg, because it takes such a long time to mature in the sunlight, and eventually it'll give birth to another St. George's dragon. St. George killed the dragon, but here we're giving life instead. It also pays to take photographs whenever. This is with a really cheap camera, phone camera. And I thought, I saw this Psilocopa pubescens fly into this Helanthius debilis, one of the sunflowers. And I took a photograph. It's not a camera that normally would be able to take a photograph, but it coincidentally caught the action there. And it always pays to take a photograph, even though you haven't got the equipment. This is a spineless prickly pear, Opuntia ficus indica variety Burbank. That was originally cultivated for cattle in the early 1900s. I bought it on eBay as fresh tortoise food. After looking for it for 20 years, I'd been after it for about 2 decades. I finally found it on eBay. Its fruits are also used for human consumption. Beside it, that's Euphorbia trigona rubra. It's thought to be a cultivated plant that has hybridized, because they can't find it in the wild. It doesn't give flowers. And here beside it is a cacti. Which one is it? It's Selinserius undatus, I think it is. The one, the dragon fruit they sell at supermarkets, that's it. It's actually fruiting at the moment. That's the Opuntia ficus indica variety Burbank flower. These are Peruvian apples, Cereus repandus. I grew from seeds, several meters high now. It is a commercially important crop in some places. They also flower at night, jutting out horizontally. The flowers jutting out horizontally, and are moth and bat pollinated. The flowers are larger than what you see there, because I took this photograph in the daylight. They actually open up just as large as your hand. And that's a close-up. This is possibly Selinserius costarricensis, but all the plants in the region of this type, they're all closed, and it flowers, but it's never fruited. So I can't tell until it fruits. There is another close-up again, taken during the day, and they've closed up by then. This is an ornamental cluster of Aeoniums, Dwarfallows, Hygorthiopsis, and Gaptopetalums. They've all just been potted into larger pots, so this cluster will get much denser. It's about 2.5 meters across. I like to plant these together because the radial leaves resemble flowers to my eye. This is a dragon tree, Dracena draco, from the Canary Islands. They have very large specimens of these planted throughout Gibraltar, and I collected these and sold them, collecting from the Upper Rock, because it's an introduced plant. You can take it out. Nobody's going to say anything. They self-seed the large trees, the large specimens planted in gardens that fruit. They produce loads of fruits, orange fruit on the crowns, and the seagulls of all birds come in and gobble them up. And there's masses of seagulls all around Gibraltar. And that's why they're self-seeded everywhere. I like trellising. I like cascading alyssums as well. That's in a small pot. That's specifically, they like the roots constricted in a small pot, and let the roots penetrate to the surface below. And I've had them much larger than that. That's another dragon tree I rescued. That's got about 3 or 4 branches to it. This is an African baobab tree. This is lately in the Morrison's supermarket. I grew this at this other garden I've got, which I've given in the keys today. Did I mention that? And I grew this African baobab from seed I bought on eBay from Madrid. After growing it there, this shot up in a year. If you force many succulents, this is a succulent tree. With many succulents, you can force feed them quite successfully. I grew this in about a year. It shot up, and then the year after that, I asked for permission and had it planted. It's about 2 meters high now. This is Alfonso, the gardener that works there. He's about 1.50 meters, he said, and he takes care of it now that I'm leaving. This is another tree I planted. I call it the woman tree because it looks it reminds me of the shape of a woman. We tend to call trees give the character of maleness to trees, and I thought, well, and I saw it in a nursery. I saw it when it was really tiny, and it had that shape. And ever since I planted, this is at Morrison's again. It's kept that shape. This is in the last week, Leonotis, which is Leonotis leonorus, blossoming as I was walking past it this past week. And this is, what is this? South African Senecio angulatus in bloom with stone pine Pinus pinea at the top and some bougainvillea on the right. I particularly prefer this variety of bougainvillea because the flower changes throughout the year. It changes from orange to red or vice versa. I don't remember which, but I remember Botanic Gardens that it used to always do that. This is a huge expanse of nasturtiums. I just love nasturtiums. Tropelium mahus, isn't it? I just love it because I know that it's going to be fodder for some caterpillars. And this one, I didn't know what it was. This is my last slide. I looked it up, and it might be Retama monosperma, but I'm not sure. It just looked gorgeous, and I had to take a photograph. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. A good
Thank
tour
you.
of plants. That you won't going to bring any of them to Britain when you come.
I know. You know the Euphorbia millis. You know the Euphorbia millis, the St. George's. I discovered after growing all different types of cultivars. Sorry, I'm trying to get out of the share. I stop share. Okay.
Okay.
I had several, like 10 different types of Euphorbia millis cultivars, different colors and all that. I discovered that my great grandmother used to grow them because her grandson had a nursery. He's died. He died in the last couple of years. Her grandson had a nursery, and he gave me several cuttings of these. I can't bring a single one over. I won't.
I'd slip one in your pocket.
No. I'd rather not. I'd rather not have it on my conscience. It's nice being trained like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everybody for contributing. I'm sorry we have no time for questions. We've run over by 3/4 of an hour already. But next year I shall allow I shall book a much longer slot, although it doesn't really seem to make any difference. It's just we have a better idea of what we're doing. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'll stop recording now. I don't. Yes.